Welcome to Dream or a Night, everyone, the place where we come together to listen, to unwind, and to drift gently into that sweet, peaceful sleep we all crave. I'm Daniel, your host tonight, and oh, how grateful I am that you've chosen to spend this quiet evening with us. Thank you so much for being here. Good evening, everyone, and welcome back. Can you believe it? Tonight, we're diving deep into one of the most astonishing, most heartbreaking, and most inspiring lives ever lived. The incredible story of Genghis Khan. Oh, just saying his name sends shivers down my spine. How on earth did a little boy, born into the brutal, unforgiving steppes of Mongolia, rise from nothing to unite warring tribes, conquer massive empires, and forge one of the largest realms humanity has ever seen? Who was this man really, before the world trembled at the name Genghis Khan? And what kind of legacy, what kind of world did he leave for all of us centuries later? We're going to follow his extraordinary journey together, from the desperate struggles of his childhood and heartbreaking exile, all the way to the thunderous rise of his unstoppable army, the breathtaking expansion of his empire, and the profound, lasting impact his rule had on trade routes, cultures, and even the shape of our modern world today. It's a tale of raw ambition, unbreakable endurance, and total transformation. How one man's fierce vision forever altered the course of history. Isn't that just mind-blowing? As always, I'd truly love to hear from you. Where in the world are you tuning in from right now? What time is it where you are? Are you curled up to unwind after a long day, eager to discover something new? Or maybe hoping to drift off into sleep while we travel back through time? Whatever the reason, I'm so grateful you're here with me tonight. Now, are you ready? Let's begin this epic adventure. Picture it. The wind sweeping across the vast Mongolian grasslands, relentless and wild. That wind was the very first teacher for every child born there. It toughened the skin, cleared the eyes with its stinging bite, and carried 1,000 different scents, some promising life, others whispering danger. Can you feel it? In that fierce wind, on the banks of the Onon River back in the 12th century, a child named Temujin came into a world where your worth was measured only in the horses you owned, the kin who stood by you, and the courage burning in your heart. Later stories and chronicles would recall an incredible omen at his birth. The newborn baby clenched a clot of blood tightly in his tiny fist. On the step that was seen as a powerful sign, the child was destined to become a warrior, a fighter. Was the omen true? Who knows? But the extraordinary life that unfolded afterward made the legend fit perfectly, didn't it? Temujin was born into the proud Borjigin lineage, a family that traced their ancient ancestors back to the mystical blue wolf and a graceful fallow doe. His father, Yasuge, was a respected leader of a small band. They hunted, raided when necessary, and bartered across the rugged valleys east of the Kingman Mountains. His mother, Hurlun, wasn't born Borjigin. She had been taken as a young woman from the Olkonud people, snatched away while she was betrothed to a Merkid man named Chiledu. Yasuge himself led that daring abduction during a ride along the Onon River. In the harsh politics of the steppe, such acts were commonplace, brutal, and heartbreaking to our modern eyes, yet deeply woven into the endless cycle of alliances and bitter vengeance. But Hurlun, oh, she was strong. She adapted to her new life with an iron will that would one day save her children when the entire tribe cruelly turned its back on them. The naming of the boy was no accident. It tied personal memory to fierce public rivalry. Yesugei had recently captured a Tatar warrior named Temujin Yuge, and so the newborn son took the captive's name as his own. The Tatars were ancient enemies of the Borjigin, loyal to the powerful Jin state far beyond the frontier. Imagine carrying the name of a defeated foe. It was a constant reminder of the fragile, unsettled balance between tribes. A quiet but bold little victory etched right into the cradle of a family. The vast steppe itself became Temujin's first classroom. He learned to ride a shaggy pony before he could even string full sentences together. He mastered tracking swift gazelle across the plains, judging the depth and power of a river just by its rushing sound, and scanning the distant ridges for any sign of approaching men friends or foes. For a child growing up in a simple felt tent, hunger was always lurking just beyond the warm glow of the firelight. How terrifying that must have been. In spring, the herds foaled and lambed, bringing new life. In summer, families loaded their carts and moved to lusher grass. Autumn brought hunts and raids for food and glory. And winter forced everyone to go quiet, huddling together while watching the endless horizon for enemies closing in. There were no fancy palace tutors, no books spread open on tables, but there was a rigorous school of sharp observation, reading the weather, assessing horseflesh, and understanding the unpredictable tempers of people. Temujin's very first lesson in politics came early, with his betrothal. When he was maybe just 9 years old, Yesugei arranged a marriage alliance with the Ongiret tribe, who controlled prime pastures along the Kerulin River. The girl was named Berta, and she came from a family whose wise elders knew that marriages bound far more than just two young hearts. They tied whole tribes together. Following custom, Yesugei brought his son to live for a while in the Ongiret camp among his future in-laws. But on the long journey home, tragedy struck. Yesugei stopped to share a meal with some Tatars who recognized him and poisoned his food. He made it back to his own camp, but the poison did its deadly work. The sudden death of a chieftain usually shattered his people into fragments. In this heartbreaking case, it meant total abandonment. A widow and her young children left to scrape survival from the unforgiving edges of the steppe. The Taichiud, once allies of Yesugei, coldly refused to follow a mere boy. They stripped the camp of everything valuable they could carry and rode away, leaving Hualun alone with her sons and daughters to face the wilderness. The secret history of the Mongols captures the raw bitterness of those desperate days. Hualun dug edible roots along the riverbank with her own hands and taught her children how to snare mice and marmots for food. They fished through holes chopped in the thick ice. They learned to sleep lightly, always alert, and to hide their precious horses in the darkness. Can you imagine? The thin line between starvation and survival often came down to the weight of one small rabbit caught at dusk. This brutal schooling etched deep, permanent marks into Temujin's young character. It taught him the painful truth that even kin could fail you, that loyalty was never a birthright. It showed him how a small, united household could endure horrors that should have destroyed them. And it revealed how rare mercy could be like meat in the dead of February, forcing him to build his own unbreakable network of trust. That vital network started with the very first men who chose to follow Temujin, not because of his bloodline, but because of who he was. There's the touching tale of a poor herdsman named Sorkun Shira. The Taichi youth captured teenage Temujin, locked a heavy wooden kangwe around his neck, and paraded him like a trophy in their camp. One night during a noisy feast, Temujin managed to slip his bonds and flee to the river. Sorkun Shira discovered the exhausted boy hiding in the reeds, and he could have claimed a rich reward by turning him in. Instead, with incredible courage, he hid Temujin in his own ger and risked everything to help him escape. Years later, when Temujin commanded thousands, he never forgot that act of kindness. He sought out Sorkun Shira and elevated his entire family. That memory became a sacred private rule for him. Always reward those who stand by you when you're poor, and never, ever forget the humble and lowly. Another loyal companion came early to Boorchu. Temujin had lost valuable horses to raiders and encountered this young man while desperately searching for them. Boorchu didn't hesitate. He rode out with Temujin through the dark night, and together they tracked down the thieves and reclaimed the animals. When Temujin gratefully asked what reward Boorchu desired, the young man asked for nothing at all and simply chose to stay. In the years ahead, Boorchu would lead warriors across the vast expanse of North China and remain steadfastly loyal, even when older, prouder nobles wavered. Then there was Yelme, a man from the Jurkin clan who carefully nursed Temujin back to health after a serious wound. And there were others brave souls whose names flash briefly in the stories before fading away. But the pattern shines clear and bright. Temujin built his earliest following through deep personal bonds, through visible fairness and obligation, rather than relying on inherited rank or privilege. Yet even this growing household faced dark storms from within. One of the most tragic came right inside the family. During a desperately lean season, Temujin and his half-brother Bekta quarreled bitterly over meat and authority, the two things that meant everything when food was scarce. In the heat of that argument, Temujin and his full brother Kasa shot Bekta with arrows and left him dead on the cold ground. Hoelin was devastated. She cursed the horrifying act and warned her sons that they had now made enemies even of their own shadows. This heartbreaking moment sits right at the core of the young boy's moral growth. He learned firsthand the terrible weight of crossing a line no elder would ever bless. Later in life, when he held the fates of rivals in his powerful hands, he would sometimes pause, remember that pain, and choose restraint. Not always and never softly, but far more often than his enemies ever expected. And woven through all these early years, there's another beautiful, complicated thread: the deep friendship with Jamuka. They met as innocent boys, playing together, sharing warm milk, and swearing the ancient oath of Andar's sacred bond that turned friends into true brothers. They promised to always help each other and to divide meat and drink in perfect equal shares. Those heartfelt words would echo powerfully throughout their lives. In childhood, the oath meant sharing a cozy blanket under the stars and dreaming big dreams about the future. But in manhood, it became a profound test of clashing ambitions, a painful record of betrayal, and ultimately, astonishing forgiveness. While Temujin steadily gathered these loyal companions around him, He also sharpened his understanding of the complex politics swirling across the steppe beyond his immediate family. He carefully watched the powerful Kirite tribe and their ruler, Togrul, known in Chinese records as Khan. He observed the Naiman tribes to the west and the ever-hostile Tatars to the southeast. He heard whispers of raids secretly sponsored by the Jin dynasty to keep all the steppe tribes divided and weak. Slowly, painfully, he realized that mere survival would demand a strong patron, someone powerful enough to shelter him, while he patiently forged an even larger coalition. And then came the turning point, a gift that seemed so small at first, yet purchased something utterly immense. When Temujin finally reached manhood, he rode out to claim Berta from her family, just as the childhood promise had foretold. The wise Ongirat elders honored the long-ago agreement without hesitation. They sent the young couple off with a generous dowry, and among those treasures was a luxurious sable coat of breathtaking rare quality. Temujin didn't keep that priceless coat for himself. No, he rode south with it, seeking out the camp of Togrul. With respect and strategy, he presented the magnificent gift to the Keret ruler and asked to be treated as a true son, honoring the old friendship that had once existed between Togrul and Yasuge. Togrul accepted warmly. He welcomed Temujin as his own son and pledged his protection and help. What an incredible moment. It marked the first major political triumph of Temujin's life, achieved not through violence or raid, but through clever remembrance of kinship, heartfelt courtesy, and the perfect, timely gift. Can you feel the hope rising in that young man's heart? From such humble, thoughtful beginnings, an empire would soon begin to stir. Oh, just imagine the sheer determination burning in that young man's soul. Temujin did not keep the luxurious sable coat for himself. Absolutely not. With a spark of pure genius and quiet, hopeful ambition, he saddled up and rode south across the sweeping grasslands, the relentless wind tugging at his clothes, until he finally arrived at the impressive camp of Togrul. There, with deep humility and a racing heart, he presented that exquisite, priceless coat to the mighty Keret ruler and respectfully asked to be welcomed as a true son, all in fond memory of the strong old friendship between Togrul and his dear father, Yasuge. And what happened next? Togrul accepted with genuine warmth and open-hearted generosity. He proudly called Temujin his son and vowed solid help and protection. Can you feel the wave of relief and quiet triumph washing over him in that life-changing moment? This marked the first great political gain of Temujin's incredible life. A brilliant success won not through raid or violence, but through the clever, thoughtful use of family memory, sincere courtesy, and a perfectly chosen gift. How wise and far-seeing he already was. The powerful alliance with Togrul gave Temujin far more than mere protection from enemies. It handed him a living model of real leadership and access to truly influential men. The Keret followed the Nestorian Christian rite, especially in their court circles, and they had built long, rewarding trade links with northern China. Their busy camp buzzed as a crossroads where envoys from the dominant Jin dynasty and the faded Khitan Liao once arrived, sometimes with lavish gifts, other times with tough demands. Temujin watched everything intently, his sharp eyes drinking it all in. He studied how a Khan smoothly received envoys and fairly shared out spoils, how he richly rewarded loyalty, and how he firmly dealt with betrayal He stored these lessons deep in his mind. His future rule wouldn't just mimic the Karaite way, but he had now seen how a bigger, more organized group could be led, and how a leader could become much more than a simple raider fighting for scraps. What an eye-opener. The cherished, secret history, filled with the words of wise Mongol elders and poets, holds a deeply touching prayer Temujin offered in a moment of pure fear, high on the steep slopes of Burkhan Khaldun. He had climbed that rugged mountain desperately to escape deadly pursuers, his breath short and terror gripping him. And there he vowed to honor it forever if he survived. Later, keeping that promise, he made the mountain sacred to his family and required everyone crossing it to show proper respect. How profound and faithful. This moment is so meaningful because it reveals the gentle, believing side of the young man, often hidden under the later image of the fierce conqueror. He wasn't a cold skeptic. He truly felt eternal heaven watching and judging that oaths carried real power, and breaking them would cost a man his luck. His later strict rules protecting envoys and honoring deals grew straight from that same deep faith. Doesn't it touch you? In these crucial years, Temujin also eagerly practiced the deadly art of steppe fighting. He mastered turning a chase into a trap, faking flight to lure enemies into open ground, signaling across wide fronts with flags by day and torches by night. He had no siege machines, no foot soldiers in ranks, no written commands. Yet his quick mind and natural talent for turning small clashes into big wins made him stand out. The composite bow was the soul of his fighting style. Imagine its beauty and power, layered from horn, wood, and sinew, short for saddle use, but strong enough to pierce armor far away. A rider could shoot while leaning dramatically off his pony, becoming a tiny target. Boys learned it for fun, racing and laughing, then used it seriously to survive battles. Thrilling, wasn't it? The world beyond the grasslands was still mostly distant tales and dreams. Chinese traders reached the edges with silk bolts and iron pots, bringing stories of huge walls along mountains and square-shaped cities. Islamic merchants arrived with glass and cloth, describing markets so big you could wander a year without repeating a stall. For now, though, these were just cozy stories for cold nights. Temujin's real worries were close and urgent. Keep horses strong, family fed, friends loyal, and gain a few more allies. The first chapter of his life doesn't end with a grand crowning no. It ends softly in a tent with a heartfelt promise. Temujin sat warmly with Berta under felt and hide, the sable coat now proudly on Togrul's shoulders. Yelme shared meat and talked excitedly of rides ahead. In the dark somewhere, Yamuka dreamed of riding together again with his Anda, the tough boy who dug roots from frozen ground to live, had started learning a new skill arranging people with the careful touch he'd once used for rabbit snares. The wind pressed the jar and whispered approval through the seams. Could it feel greatness coming? Dawn on the steppe can be gentle or brutal, and one dawn burned into memory forever as brutal. Temujin's camp rested quietly along a curve near the Ono. Smoke from night fires faded in cold air. Horses grazed at light's edge. Guards felt too much ease. Dangerous mistake. From pale dawn burst murked riders like angry crows on one kill. They held old grudges against Hualun's family and the man who'd taken her. They wanted revenge and women. They got both. The attack hit fast and smart. The small camp couldn't resist. Temujin fought hard to protect his family, then fled with companions up Burkan Khaldun's slopes. Berta couldn't escape. She was seized with other women and children, carried north to Merkid lands. Abduction's old pain struck the Borjigin again, this time as deep hurt, not deal. Up in rough birch and stone shelter on the sacred mountain, Temujin spoke to sky and earth. He vowed again to honor it if saved. He sent urgent messages to two vital men, Togrul, who'd taken him as foster son with a sable coat, and Jamuka, his youth's sworn brother. Both came quickly. Blood and oath still meant everything on the steppe when clear. Next came Temujin's first big command role. Kerit arrived in force. Jamuka brought waves of riders. Temujin added what he had. They hunted raiders over rivers and through willow valleys. Merkid felt safe among kin big mistake on the steppe. Allies struck fast. Arrows flew like thistles in wind. Merkid shattered, fleeing along streams. Berta was found alive, returned to Temujin's arms. Hoelun's sister rescued too. In that joyful reunion, alliances for the next decade forged in thanks and victory. How overwhelming the emotion. The victory camp became a true school. Kerit brought clerks, armed men, Nestorian priests, knowledgeable messengers to Jin lands. Jamuka's riders had noble pride from old lines. Temujin's smaller group followed him for his own merits, not blood. For a while, camps blended beautifully. Same hunts, shared feasts, stories polishing old fame and building new. In these months, Yoshi's birth started quiet doubt. Berta's time with Merkid allowed gossip to spread. Whispers hard to silence in nomad life. Temujin accepted Yoshi fully, treating him as son publicly. Still, the rumor lingered. Later, brothers would use it as weapon. Now, the birth meant household survival after near destruction. Temujin learned practical things too. He saw Togrul handle visitors and decide fast. Studied Kerit patrols and signals for strangers. Watched Jamuka win loyalty with gifts and lose it with loose words. Noted how fast pride became resentment over fame. The long stay ended wisely, part before envy ruined it. Temujin chose his own camp, leaving foster father and Ando. Closest women urged him. Hoelun sensed when thanks turns to chain. Berta, calm advisor, agreed. Temujin and Jamuka spoke brotherly words one last time. But tension underneath wouldn't ease with more closeness. When Temujin left, 41 key households followed. Not for gold or fear, they'd seen his fair meat-sharing, promise-keeping, and chose that over old rank gains. What trust he inspired! Oh, can you feel the raw tension crackling in the air? The split between Temujin and Jamuka had finally ripped everything wide open, laying bare the simmering rivalries that had been building for so long. What a heartbreaking turning point, two sworn brothers, once inseparable, now drifting apart on paths that could only lead to collision. For a year or two after that painful separation, every move was careful, calculated, almost breathless. Camps shifted constantly across the vast steppe as each leader anxiously weighed the best pastures, the precious water sources, and the ever-shifting drift of alliances. Who would stand with whom? Whose loyalty might waver next? Rival tribes watched from the sidelines, eyes narrowed, making their own cold calculations about where power was truly heading. The Tatars, often favoured by the mighty Jin dynasty as a deliberate counterweight to the rising Borjigin, kept a cautious, wary distance smart, weren't they? The Taichiud, those who had once cruelly abandoned Hoelun and her children to starvation, hadn't forgotten the resilient young man they had hunted like an animal. Oh, the grudges ran deep, and the Merkid, they smouldered with lingering rage, quietly searching for new allies to settle old scores. The steppe felt like a powder keg, ready to explode. All the while, through every watchful night and tense day, Temujin worked tirelessly on the ground right under his feet, building something solid and revolutionary. He organized his loyal companions into tight, responsive squads that could spring into action without always waiting for his direct command. How forward-thinking was that? He started creating small, flexible groups of 10 and of 100, deliberately mixing men from different families and clans. He did this quietly, in embryo, long before he held enough power to force every tribe to accept such radical change. But that simple, habit-breaking ancient bloodlines and drawing bold new ones based purely on merit and faithful service began right here in these uncertain years, and not later when victory made it easy. Can you see the seeds of a whole new order taking root? Then, like thunder rolling across the plains, war finally announced itself at a place forever remembered as Dalan Baljut. Jamuka commanded the larger following, backed by those proud, older noble names that carried centuries of prestige. He had cleverly gathered a coalition of anxious clans who deeply feared what Temujin represented, a world turned upside down. They clung desperately to tradition. They didn't want a future where a humble herdsman's son might outrank a prince at the feast table. No, they wanted the comfortable old order to endure, with its rigid pecking order of privilege clearly marked at every gathering. When the two massive hosts finally clashed, the sky itself seemed alive, thick with circling kestrels overhead, while the ground trembled violently under the thunderous drumming of countless hooves. Temujin's brave men fought with everything they had, fierce and unyielding, but they were painfully outnumbered. In the chaos, Temujin himself took a serious wound and barely escaped with his life. How close he came to losing everything in that desperate hour. Jamuka, flush with victory, did not content himself with simple triumph. In a chilling display of cruelty, he ordered the boiling alive of captive leaders and the brutal mutilation of others. That shocking savagery left a scar far deeper and more lasting than any wound from the battle itself. Men who had proudly served Jamuka suddenly felt waves of shame and gnawing fear. In the quiet months that followed, some began to drift away, seeking something better. And they found Temujin's camp, where they were welcomed openly, forgiven without hesitation, and immediately put to meaningful work. What a contrast in leadership. Temujin refused to sink into despair after the crushing defeat at Dalan Baljut. No, he did exactly what he had always done in dark times. He moved forward, listened carefully to those around him, and rebuilt with unbreakable determination. That's the spirit that defined him, isn't it? There's a fascinating account suggesting he spent some time deep in the lands of the Jin dynasty, perhaps serving as a mercenary for hire, or maybe even as a prisoner who cleverly turned captivity to his advantage by making his captors recognize his unique value. Later, Chinese envoys wrote about a remarkable Mongol leader who absorbed crucial lessons from their sophisticated ways before returning to the open steppe with an even sharper understanding of the vast world beyond the grasslands. Whether this story points directly to Temujin himself or to one of his trusted inner circle, the powerful effect is clear in everything that followed. When he reappeared on the scene, full of renewed purpose and fire, he carried with him a deeper, more strategic grasp of the immense power lying just across the frontier, and exactly how those complex frontier politics could be skillfully turned to his own growing advantage. What a game-changing perspective. By the middle of the 1190s, the political map of the steppe had shifted dramatically once again. Temujin, with iron resolve, began settling old scores through a masterful mix of ruthless, decisive blows and surprisingly careful, generous pardons. He turned his full attention against the Tatars, those long-time sources of deep family grief and pain. In a swift, merciless campaign that sliced through their rich pastures like a sharp knife through soft felt, he completely shattered their power. He killed or scattered their proud chiefs and wisely folded the ordinary rank-and-file warriors into his own expanding following. Among the captives, one brave man stepped forward and openly confessed that he had been the archer who shot Temujin's horse out from under him in an earlier battle. Temujin, far from punishing him, deeply admired the man's raw honesty and undeniable courage. He spared his life on the spot. He even gave him an honorable new name, Jabe, the Arrow, and oh, how that decision paid off. Jabe grew into one of Temujin's most brilliantly skilled commanders, a fearless cavalry leader whose uncanny eye for terrain and lightning instinct for surprise attacks would one day terrify enemies all the way from Manchuria to the distant Dnieper River. What an inspiring example of turning a foe into a loyal legend. At the very same time, Temujin skillfully used his strong connection to Togrul to stabilize matters within the Karaite. A dangerous faction had risen against the aging ruler, threatening everything. Temujin rode swiftly to his foster father's aid, crushed the rebellion with precision, and left the Karaite throne far more secure than before. That loyal act deeply pleased the older man. Like a proud father beaming at a son who had acted with true wisdom and sense. But it also stirred quiet murmurs of jealousy among those watching from the shadows. With each hard-won success, Temujin's prestige soared higher and higher. Yet on the treacherous steppe, prestige is as dangerous as it is valuable. It draws loyal men to your banner, but it also attracts envious notice in equal measure. How delicately he had to balance that growing fame. The ongoing connection to the influential Jin court continued to play its clever part. In 1196, the Jin suddenly turned against some rebellious Tatar groups and called on trusted steppe allies to join a punitive expedition. Temujin answered without hesitation. He fought brilliantly, sent back prisoners and severed heads as grim proof of his service, and received an official title and rich gifts in return. That short but strategic alignment with a settled, sophisticated empire left some of his rivals bewildered and unsettled, while it delighted others who recognized the mark of a truly adaptable leader. One who could move confidently across cultural boundaries without the slightest embarrassment. Temujin took exactly what he needed from the alliance and gave back only what cost him little. Masterful, wasn't it? Around this intense period, his household grew richer and more complex in beautiful ways. His sons by Berta were now old enough to start riding with their own small bands of companions and to begin learning the heavy responsibilities of command, even in the smallest measures. Yoshi, despite that lingering shadow of rumor from his birth, displayed real courage and a generous spirit that won hearts. Chagatai revealed a stern, unyielding sense of law and spoke with an iron mouth that commanded respect. Urgaday possessed the rare gift of warm friendship. He could calm rising quarrels before they hardened into something dangerous. Tolui, the youngest, already carried a fierce inner fire that experienced men noticed and admired, even while he was still a boy. Temujin watched his growing sons as closely and carefully as he watched his most trusted officers. He thoughtfully arranged marriages that would tightly bind important tribes to his central tent. He listened attentively to Berta, who offered calm, insightful advice in their private moments, and to Huelun, his remarkable mother, who never lost her sharp taste for blunt, unflinching truth. The old deep friendship with Yamuka did not simply fade into silence. From time to time, hopeful messages passed between their camps, and sincere efforts were made to recapture the innocent simplicity of their shared youth. But the harsh steppe rarely allows such tender wishes to fully come true, does it? Jamuka could not bring himself to accept a new world where men of humble lineage stood proudly beside ancient princes. Temujin, for his part, would never agree to return to the rigid old hierarchy that had caused so much suffering. Their paths continued to diverge, even when their words reached out trying to bridge the growing gap. Defections kept coming, steadily wearing down the traditional old guard. Men who had witnessed the horrifying boiling of captives after Dalam Baljut could not shake those haunting memories. They sought a camp where justice felt cleaner and fairer, even when it demanded hardness. Some arrived after a personal quarrel with a chief who had slighted or insulted them. Some came because a respected shaman had spoken powerfully of a grand destiny written clearly in the stars. Others joined simply because they dreamed of a better future where their own sons could rise higher than they themselves ever had. Temujin welcomed every defector with a calm, measured hand, never too eager, never suspicious. He carefully distributed them across his expanding units and made certain that no man served only alongside his own cousins and brothers. That seemingly small decision, started modestly, would eventually become the strong skeleton of an entirely new order. Brilliant foresight. The years clustering around the turn of the century proved a true crucible, forging Temujin in fire. He had tasted bitter failure, forced retreat, hard lessons, and then returned to the field stronger, more confident, and utterly sure of his path. He had wisely bound himself to a powerful patron for protection, while beginning to recognize that even a patron could one day become both shelter and potential problem. He had rescued his beloved wife and restored his honor using borrowed strength, then faithfully repaid that debt through loyal service and stunning victory. He had transformed sworn enemies into trusted commanders and turned harmful whispers into iron discipline. Most importantly, he had started speaking less about personal grudges and more about a grander work that soared far above the old, endless games of raiding and revenge. The vast steppe wasn't quite ready to fully embrace that visionary work yet, but more and more men had begun to listen, to hear the promise in his words. Hope was stirring. On a crisp late autumn night in camp, Temujin gathered in close council with his most trusted, Borchu, Yelme, Yebe, and a handful of wise elders. The flickering firelight painted glowing islands on their serious faces, while leaving the rest in mysterious shadow. They spoke quietly, but urgently, about where to move when the first heavy snows arrived, which rival tribe had grown brittle and might soon split under pressure, which ally would prove steadfast if forced to choose between clinging to old pride and embracing exciting new promise. Outside in the biting cold, a young rider bundled in a threadbare coat patiently held two restless horses, waiting for the vital order to carry urgent messages into the night. He had no idea that one day he would ride for a mighty nation that did not even exist yet. He knew only that the piercing cold bit a little less when a man stood close to a loyal horse. The wise advice he received suited a ruler who had painfully learned to use any tool that truly worked. Genghis never stopped fighting for his vision. No, but he mastered the crucial skill of knowing exactly when to stop destroying and start building. The family that anchored his central tent had evolved in profound ways too. Yochi had been granted the distant lands of the far west, rich with sweeping pasture and boundless promise. The sharp quarrel with Chagatai had cooled publicly under the firm decision naming Ogede as heir. Tolui stayed closest to his father on the battlefield and had become the reliable hand that tightened a siege precisely when others began to falter. Berta observed her sons with a clear, loving eye and carried the quiet gravity that steadies restless men. Huelu, older now and joyfully surrounded by grandchildren, still vividly remembered those desperate years when a single snared marmot meant the difference between life and death for her family, and she marveled at the calm, orderly winter camp around her, a wonder few could truly appreciate, unless they too had tasted raw hunger. Before any great army moved again, the Khan completed vital work that would shape everything to come. The innovative decimal organization expanded from battlefield tactic into the very structure of the entire realm, not just the fighting host. Leaders of thousands and tens of thousands were now expected to fairly judge disputes among the people as skillfully as they rode into battle. Daragachi overseers, carefully chosen for their proven diligence and upright propriety, were firmly planted like reliable posts in towns that had willingly accepted Mongol rule. Their essential duty wasn't to invent brand new laws from nothing, but to faithfully uphold the exact promises the center had made. If a city had opened its gates early in submission, that honorable fact was carefully recorded, and strong protection was granted as a sacred matter of trust. If brave merchants had supplied crucial horse fodder at a dangerous river crossing, their official tablets were thoroughly checked and their hard-earned privileges promptly renewed. But if a greedy governor dared cheat on shares of the tax, the punishment came swift, visible, and unmistakable to all. Justice and order finally taking shape. Oh, just think about it. The yasa wasn't some dusty code you could simply pull off a shelf like an old book. No, it was the living, breathing, continuing voice of a ruler whose deepest wish was for his soldiers to feel truly watched over and protected, for merchants to know in their hearts that their contracts would be honored without question, and for envoys to cross even the most dangerous frontiers with absolute confidence they wouldn't be harmed. How powerful and reassuring was that vision of justice? The grueling Western campaigns had taught the Mongols something revolutionary. Engineers could be every bit as valuable as the finest archers when a stubborn city hid behind thick, towering walls. craftsmen from all corners were carefully gathered into a mobile, elite corps that could swiftly raise massive counterweight engines in mere days, construct sturdy ladders and protective shields, dig mines deep beneath gates, and ignite fires to burn away supporting props at the perfect, decisive moment. Can you picture the ingenuity and sheer determination? A special unit of skilled watermen even travelled with the army men drawn from distant lands, where ancient canals were cherished and precious lifelines. If there was any chance a river could be diverted to flood a city's defences, they would boldly try it. And if it failed, the failure was studied closely, lessons learned, and another clever method immediately applied. That relentless habit of close, thoughtful attention, that's what truly separated a mere raider from a world-changing conqueror, isn't it? As the second decade of the century dawned, the court's sharp attention turned firmly toward Western Xia. Years earlier, when Genghis had first probed and tested its strength, the Tangut court at Zhongxing had wisely paid tribute, sent valuable hostages, and even accepted a marriage alliance that bound them tightly to the Mongol camp. They had solemnly promised military support whenever called upon. But as the vast empire expanded and the commanding lines stretched impossibly far from the Onon River all the way to the distant Oxus, Xia nobles grew overconfident. They coldly calculated that the moment for caution had finally passed. They brazenly failed to send promised troops when summoned. They began dealing with southern powers in ways that openly suggested they dreamed of a future free from Mongol suzerainty. Yet, there was one grievance that cut far deeper than mere political calculation envoys had once again been harmed. To dare raise a hand against a sacred messenger was nothing less than a direct challenge to the fundamental order that the Khan believed heaven itself had entrusted him to uphold. With righteous fury burning in his heart, he resolved to ride and settle the matter once and for all. The long, arduous route to Zhongxing wound through the narrow corridor of Gansu, where towering mountains mercilessly pressed against the endless desert, and hardy towns clung desperately to rivers that farmers had patiently guided for countless centuries. Subutai, that brilliant strategist, rode ahead in one swift wing with clear orders to move lightning fast and sow utter confusion along the vital line of towns the Tangut court depended upon. Tolui commanded another strong wing, ensuring that enemy garrisons could never gather confidently behind the main advance. Genghis himself moved forward with the overwhelming main weight of the army, a force like rolling thunder. Mongol columns boldly crossed vast stretches of unforgiving gravel and burning sand that other armies wisely avoided in the scorching summer months. They deliberately chose late autumn and winter for the march, when blistering heat couldn't grind a horse down to a weary walk, and when the biting cold actually sharpened the rider's senses rather than crippling them with exhaustion. What incredible adaptability! One ordinary morning, people in the towns along the Edsin and Xiang rivers looked up in sudden alarm to see massive dust clouds rising where none should ever appear, and shadowy riders thundering in where no sensible general would dare send troops. At Haishi City and at Liangzhou, the Mongols methodically tried every possible door, offering terms but ready for resistance. A city that wisely opened its gates early, preserved its vital craftsmen, and handed over stores of grain peacefully. But a city that foolishly fired on sacred envoys. It quickly saw towering mangonels raised against its walls, and heard the ominous hum of massive stones slicing through the air. Subutai masterfully cut the crucial roads linking towns to provinces, and provinces to the distant capital. Caravans that once flowed freely from west to east, carrying luxurious silk, fine paper, and expertly worked metal, now carried only frantic reports and wounded men desperately racing back to Zhongxing. In growing panic, the Tangut court sent pleading cries for help in every direction and scraped together whatever forces it could in the rugged Helan Mountains to form a desperate, last defensive line. Lingwu, strategically positioned on the mighty Yellow River, became the next critical keystone. Capturing it meant stepping boldly across the threshold into the very heartland of the Tangut people. The Mongols thoroughly tested the city's formidable walls, probing for strengths and weaknesses, then applied every hard lesson they had learned from campaigns in China. Sappers worked tirelessly to undermine towering structures. Engine crews focused their fire hour after hour on the same vulnerable point, then shifted at the wave of a single commanding flag so their stones struck exactly where the shock would shatter defenses most effectively. When a breach finally opened, the first brave men rushing through weren't coldly sacrificed as a lesson. No. They were immediately supported and relieved by fresh waves, and the fierce fight surged steadily inward like an unstoppable tide. When Lingwu finally fell after bitter resistance, the court in Zhongxing felt the iron grip tightening inescapably around them. The defense of Western Shire didn't collapse solely because the Mongols were so relentlessly fierce. It crumbled because the Tangut court had become a chaotic, noisy place where privileged men with rank argued endlessly, as if victory could somehow be won through clever sentences alone. Factions that had bitterly quarreled in easier, peaceful times still quarreled now, even with doom approaching. One desperate party urged immediate flight to rebuild in more distant, hidden valleys. Another clung stubbornly to trusting the city's strong walls. Yet another pushed to beg for merciful terms that would somehow preserve their noble privileges. The ruler himself sent confusing messages that said entirely different things to different advisors. In the disciplined Mongol camp, those frantic words from Zhongxing were calmly read for exactly what they revealed. The desperate speech of a divided court clinging to the fragile hope that time alone might save them. But the Khan had long ago learned to master time for himself. He pushed forward decisively past the Helan buttress and rode confidently into the sweeping arc of the Yellow River where Zhongxing proudly sat. The city boasted impressive earthworks and deep ditches designed to snare charging horse hooves, and it employed skilled engineers of its own who fully understood the deadly flight of stones and the strategic setting of fires. The Mongol camps were first laid out safely beyond bow range, then methodically drew inward as the siege work progressed with grim efficiency. The engine park expanded rapidly, a foreboding forest of wooden frames, taut cords, and massive counterweights. A constant, steady rain of vital messages flowed between the commanders' tents. Tolui managed the tightening siege lines with his characteristic quiet, unyielding hardness. Subutai ranged widely around the entire ring, ensuring no relief force could possibly break through. The Khan himself rode a slow, deliberate circuit from point to point, personally speaking with leaders of hundreds and of thousands, steadying their natural impatience with his calm presence. He never promised a quick or easy victory, Instead, he vowed solemnly to stay until the work was completely done. What unwavering resolve. There's an old dramatic story that the Mongols once again attempted to turn the mighty Yellow River itself against the defiant city. But a river is no tame pet. It obeys no human plan for long. The bold attempt didn't ultimately decide the siege, yet it powerfully demonstrated a habit that would never leave the Mongol mindset. If any natural force could possibly be harnessed to serve the goal, it would be fearlessly tried. When water ultimately failed, fire was unleashed. When fire proved insufficient, the patient, slow bite of mines and battering rams gnawed persistently at the same critical points with stubborn, unrelenting repetition. During these long, grueling months of siege, a heartbreaking blow struck within the family that closed one cherished path while opening others to the future. Devastating news arrived that Yoshi was dead far away in the west. He had ruled his vast appanage with a fair and measured hand, showing remarkable generosity towards surrendered cities and holding the firm loyalty of men who had once ridden fiercely against him. The painful rumor that had dogged his birth from the beginning had never been fully silenced. It resurfaced cruelly even now, when his body could not be brought east for proper rites, and it darkly stained the talk of those who had never truly liked or accepted him. Chagatai and his captains spoke with careful restraint. Ogedei offered soft, comforting words. Tolui simply kept focused on his vital work at the siege. Chinggis received the shattering news and withdrew quietly into a private tent with Berta. There, away from watching eyes, they spoke as a devoted man and woman who had together outlasted brutal hunger and endless war, and who had learned the hard truth that even a mighty Khan cannot command or extend the natural span of a precious life. When he finally stepped out, the watchful camp saw no visible change in his steady pace. Orders continued flowing as before. The siege work did not slow for a moment. Yet those who knew him most intimately afterward quietly said that a deep, permanent line had etched itself across his face. A shadow of grief that never fully lifted. The final phase at Zhongxing unfolded like so many prolonged sieges do, when defenders have exhausted every choice and hope. The desperate court asked for terms and offered submission. The Khan demanded firmly that the ruler appear in person to make it genuine and binding. The ruler instead sent only a son and empty words. The Khan stood resolute. He would accept nothing less than the personal presence of the man who had repeatedly failed to keep sacred past oaths. The ruler refused to come. The massive engines roared back to life. A critical portion of the wall finally collapsed in thunderous ruin. Assault ladders rose swiftly, their rungs slick and treacherous from countless desperate hands. When the city at last fell after such bitter resistance, the ruler was captured and sternly punished. The ancient dynasty came to its final end. Its most talented engineers and skilled craftsmen were carefully gathered and relocated to serve the growing empire. Its precious archives were methodically sorted. Its elegant court poets were scattered helplessly to the winds. Throughout the long, exhausting investment of the city, a tragic accident quietly altered the very last pages of the Khan's extraordinary life. He was no longer the vigorous young man, effortlessly running down swift gazelle across open flats. Yet, he still hunted regularly to keep his senses razor sharp and his spirit strong. In one of those fateful hunts, or perhaps during a routine ride between siege positions, he suddenly fell from his horse. Some whispered he broke bones that never set properly despite the best care. Others said he was struck by a mysterious fever from another hidden cause, or that the accumulated strain of so many relentless years had finally found its moment to manifest. Oh, how the later storytellers loved to weave elaborate threads around that fateful moment, embroidering it with dramatic tales of secret plots and heartbreaking insults disguised as love. The kind of gripping, shadowy stories that always gather around a great man's death like dark crows circling a quiet camp. But the truth that truly matters, the one that cuts straight to the heart, is so much simpler and more poignant. He began to fail. Can you feel the weight of that quiet reality settling in? Even as his strength faded, he did not for one instant call off the relentless siege. With unbreakable will, he ordered that the vital work continue right to its bitter end, and that the full punishment of the defiant Tangut house be carried out completely. What incredible resolve in the face of mortality. He summoned his sons close, gathering them around him in those solemn final days. He confirmed once again, firmly in their hearing, that Ögedei would indeed be Khan after him, ensuring no doubt lingered. He urged them passionately to finish the unfinished business in the north of China, and then to turn their full might toward whatever frontier pressed most urgently and hard against the empire. He instructed them with fatherly wisdom to guard the precious Yam relay system, to meticulously keep the vital lists, to always protect sacred envoys, to wisely use merchants as trusted partners, and, most touchingly, to forever remember Baljuna, that muddy, freezing place where true loyalty had been tested in the harshest conditions and proven unbreakable. How moving to hear him pass on those core values. He spoke privately and earnestly to Tolui about the crucial work of steadfastly holding the center together while the succession unfolded through the proper, sacred assembly. And in the most intimate moment of all, he spoke alone with Berta, thanking her deeply in words so personal and tender that no clerk ever dared set them down. Imagine the quiet emotion in that tent, the love and gratitude shared between two souls who had faced everything together. The death came gently away from the besieged city, perhaps high in the serene Yupan Mountains, where he had moved seeking cleaner, cooler air to ease his suffering. The loyal Keshik guard covered the heartbreaking news carefully, like one shields a fragile fire from sudden wind, keeping the camp steady. The vast camp functioned outwardly as if nothing earth-shattering had changed. Engines were still fed and fired, vital messages were still carried swiftly, and the last defiant ruler of Western Sia was dealt with exactly as ordered. But beneath it all, a profound sorrow rippled through every heart. When the body could finally be moved with dignity, a solemn escort began the long, emotional journey north. Legends sprang up and were told in countless ways over campfires for generations. That the devoted escort silently killed every passerby to keep the sacred route forever secret. That horses were repeatedly turned over the exact spot where the grave would lie to completely erase all signs. That an entire forest was deliberately planted over the resting place, so that deep roots and thick branches would guard it eternally. There's another haunting legend that whispers. A mighty river was diverted, its waters forever hiding and protecting him. But the wise elders of the Borjigin clan say only this, with quiet reverence. he was taken toward the holy Birkenkalden, and the precise place is not and never will be marked. How mysterious and fitting for such a legendary figure. He had told his sons with firm conviction that a true king of the steppe needed no grand stone monument to command where men should bow in respect. He needed only their enduring memory and unwavering obedience. What profound wisdom! The funeral rites were beautifully simple and deeply sacred to the hardy men of the grass. The black tough banners were carefully furled away, and the pure white ones were lifted high in honor. Horses were led in slow, respectful circles around a modest mound of earth that made no bold declaration of itself, just quiet and eternal. Shamans raised their voices to the vast, eternal blue sky, earnestly asking it to welcome and receive an extraordinary soul that had forever altered the course of entire peoples and mighty rivers. Can you sense the spiritual weight of that moment? Men who had once shared warm mare's milk with him in the desperate mud at Baljuna stood silently with heads bowed low, vividly remembering the bitter taste of muddy water on their tongues, a shared hardship that bonded them forever. Women who had fiercely wrapped their frightened children in thick cloaks against howling winter winds wept openly for a visionary ruler who had made the once perilous roads safe enough for caravans to travel under strong guard from one distant horizon to another. How bittersweet those tears must have been. The horses were turned solemnly to the north, then to the south, then to the east, and finally to the west. And every warrior in the army knew deep in their souls that they would ride again, because the great man, even in death, had declared that the vital work was not a mere fire that could ever be extinguished in the east. His vision lived on. Makali, that steadfast pillar, still held the crucial Mongol position in the north of China, with a patience and skill that impressed even bitter enemies. He'd methodically organized countless counties and prefectures under official Mongol seals, and wisely used local administrators to keep detailed tax registers accurate and current. Some stubborn towns still resisted fiercely. Others quietly reopened their gates after an internal change of governor or a sharp quarrel among rival court factions. The clear path laid down by the Khan would empower his successors to finish what he had so boldly begun. The Jin court had already fled southward from Zhongdu to Kaifeng in growing desperation, a frantic move that could not possibly hide the steady erosion of their once mighty power. The experienced commanders knew without doubt that they would return to complete the conquest. For the solemn present, the vast army gathered protectively around the grieving family and waited patiently for the great assembly that would raise Ögedei to the honored place his father had long promised him. The last camp of Genghis Khan did not empty hastily or in chaos. It paused respectfully for the sacred time that ancient custom requires when a truly great one passes from this world. Distant princes from far-flung lands were solemnly summoned to the assembly. Messengers rode swiftly along the reliable Yam with official tablets that opened every necessary door. The elite Keshig stood vigilant watch over a silent tent, where no commanding voice called for a fresh horse at dawn, a heartbreaking change that spoke volumes. In the busy workshops of the engineers, men quietly rubbed thick dirt from their weary hands and set precious tools in careful order. In the tents of the dedicated scribes, brushes were gently cleaned and vital lists tied securely with cord. In the tents of the resilient women, worn garments were patiently mended, stitch by stitch. The ever-present wind moved softly across the familiar Onon and whispered through the tall grass surrounding ancient stones of an older age. The mysterious deer stones and balballs that had marked someone's long-forgotten dead from centuries before. How timeless the steppe felt in that moment of loss. The endless steppe had absorbed countless empires over the ages and would absorb this profound news as it had absorbed so many things before. What it would not and could not absorb was the revolutionary habit of disciplined order that had been firmly planted there and carefully watered with rivers of sweat and blood. His legacy endured. When the devoted escort finally reached the north and the hidden grave received its eternal guard of solemn silence, men rose quietly from the mourning bench and saddled their ponies with renewed purpose. Ogedei would be raised as Great Khan in the proper, sacred assembly. Tolui would steadfastly hold the vital center until all the rites were beautifully finished. Chagatai would speak harshly, as was his forceful habit, and then keep unwavering faith. The sons of Jochi, including the capable Batu among them, would wait patiently and watch closely to see what important task the new Khan would assign them. Subutai, ever the master strategist, would unroll his detailed maps and point decisively first toward the mountain passes and then toward the winding rivers. Yelu Chuchai would thoughtfully bring out his precise set of figures and recommend a fair levy that would not crush the fields and a just law that would not drive honest merchants toward bribery. In the distant west and in the south, there were still rulers who naively thought the old familiar order would somehow return now that the first terrifying storm had passed. They had not yet grasped the profound truth of what had forever changed. The world was different now. The mighty army moved again, stirring with quiet determination, not yet charging toward a new enemy, but heading toward a significant place beside a river where men would gather and speak the unifying words that knit grieving families and loyal captains into one unbreakable will. In the warm circles of tents under starlit skies, elders gathered the young close and told them vividly what they had witnessed with their own eyes. They spoke of the hopeful day of the sable coat proudly offered in Togrul's welcoming camp. They spoke of that terrifying dawn raid when the Merkid cruelly took a wife and how the swift, sure answer came thundering back. They spoke of desperate Baljuna and the hard lessons from defeat at Darlan Baljut, where they had lost yet ultimately learned. They spoke of the fall of Jongdu and the distant Oxus and the fierce clash at the Kalka River. They spoke now with heavy hearts of Zhongxing and the desperate river fight at Lingwu, and of that tragic fall from a saddle that had shaken them far more than any battle ever could. They didn't shape these powerful tales into a neat conclusion or final ending. Instead, they gave them the open, enduring shape of the long road that lay ahead, full of promise and challenge. The death of Genghis Khan did not leave a vacant, empty sky overhead. No. It left clear instructions, sacred obligations, and a generation of men who had lived long enough under his commanding will to instinctively know exactly how the next vital steps should look and feel. The tent of mourning stood solemnly, guards changed shifts in respectful silence, and messengers rode tirelessly along the relay lines. From the familiar Onon all the way to the far Oxus, and from the dense forests of the north to the bustling border towns of the south, the solemn word spread swiftly, that a great assembly would soon be held to raise a new ruler. Those who held authority over thousands made their steady way in, along with princes of the royal house and envoys from allied tribes who deeply wished to be seen close to the central fire when the momentous decision was finally made. The Kuriltai gathered in the warm late summer of the second year after his passing, in the presence of revered elders, seasoned captains, and notable figures from many diverse peoples. The sons of the great founder took their honored places with quiet gravity. Chagatai spoke with the forceful intensity that had always defined him, direct and sharp as a finely honed spear point. The sons of Yolchi sat attentively with their loyal followers and carefully watched the tone of the entire gathering. Tolui maintained perfect order as faithful steward of the house. The crucial choice had been thoughtfully prepared in private by their father years earlier, and in public through the proven way each son had conducted himself across long years of hard war. Ogadai's manner was wonderfully open and approachable. He was a man who could drink deeply and laugh loudly with joy, yet he could also listen patiently and graciously say yes to a fair compromise that kept everyone united at the table. He did not carry the harsh, divisive pride that had once set Chagatai bitterly against Jochi. He was not a meticulous, patient clerk by nature, but he deeply understood the irreplaceable value of skilled clerks in building something lasting. When the respected elders finally made their solemn speech and the assembled ranks shouted their approval as one thunderous voice, Ogadai was triumphantly lifted high and declared, "Great Khan." What a powerful, hopeful moment for the empire. There is a beautiful habit among peoples who live by herds and pastures to judge a leader first and foremost by his generosity. Ogadai began his reign exactly that way, by joyfully opening the vast storehouses and giving freely. Fine horses went to captains who had worn out their faithful mounts on endless long rides. Rich robes and ornate belts were handed directly to men whose unwavering loyalty had been tested time and again. Gifts traveled outward in waves to allied tribes, and even to distant vassals. The new ruler made it abundantly clear that a Khan who holds back too tightly in a season of celebration and festivity will soon find his following growing thin and uncertain in a season of real need. What wise and generous leadership to start with. Oh, just listen to this. Those generous gifts were never the whole of Ogadai's grand policy. No, they were the joyful, ringing beginning of a powerful tone that echoed across the empire like a drumbeat. The center is strong enough to be open-handed. Can you feel the confidence, the sheer abundance radiating from that message? From that bold, generous spirit, and from the very real need for a place where swift messengers could always find the beaten heart of the court Karakoram began to rise like a phoenix. Ogadai chose the beautiful Orkan Valley, not far from those haunting ancient stone stelae, still standing tall, carved with mysterious runes left by long-dead Turk rulers. The site was perfect. Rich grass for the herds, fish jumping in the streams, timber close at hand, and it sat right at the vital crossroads of the Yam lines. Imagine the excitement as the new capital took shape. This wasn't going to be some cold stone forest like the towering Chinese capitals, no way. Karakoram was a brilliantly planned camp that grew almost magically into a thriving town. Workshops sprang up everywhere. Smiths hammering glowing iron, bowmakers bending horn and sinew, carpenters shaping beams, potters spinning clay into life. Massive storehouses lined the riverbanks, ready to feed an empire. And then, rising proud and strong, a palace of timber with beams carved by the finest artisans pulled from conquered cities across the world. How breathtaking it must have looked against the endless sky. Markets were carefully set aside for everyone. One bustling quarter for Muslim traders, another for Chinese merchants, and still others for whoever preferred to bargain among people who shared their language and customs. In the palace yard stood a legendary tree of pure silver can. You picture it gleaming in the sun. And there was a fountain crafted by a French artisan, carried all the way east by daring merchants, that poured wine, mare's milk, and sweet mead for the grandest feasts. It was pure theatre, yes, but also a roaring declaration. Strange talents from every corner of the earth were welcome here if they served the court. What an incredible symbol of openness and power. Administration suddenly flowed so much smoother once there were actual tables and chairs and sturdy walls to keep the howling wind off the precious ledgers. Yelu Chuchai, that brilliant Khitan scholar, found in Ögedei a ruler finally willing to listen, to truly trust a man who argued passionately for measured taxation instead of endless, crushing seizure. Can you imagine the relief in his voice? Yelu Chuchai laid it all out. Detailed registers of every household and field, carefully counted granaries, fixed levies that officials would collect while fearing the centre far more than any local notable. He even proposed that officials take their pay in assessed shares of salt, grain, and cloth, instead of squeezing the very lives out of taxpayers. Ögedei listened, really listened. He didn't care about being loved by farmers. He wanted a steady, predictable river of goods and shining coin that could flow along the Yam straight to his armies in the field. Practical genius. Under Yelu Chuchai's guidance, the rough early system of quotas and brutal requisitions transformed into something ministers could actually defend with hard numbers. Abuse didn't vanish overnight, no, but it became visible, glaringly so. Those who cheated could now be named, punished swiftly, and replaced. Accountability at last. The relay system itself exploded into a continent-spanning web of pure speed. Posts stood a single day's ride apart along every major line, stocked with fresh mounts, piles of fodder, and a sharp-eyed clerk ready to stamp a tablet, proving a courier had taken a new horse. Farmers and towns were assessed to support the posts, but the burden was spread fairly and accounted for down to the last grain. A message could leave Karakoram at dawn and through countless willing hands race across the burning Gobi and down into the lush valleys of North China in mere days, not weeks. Travelers carrying the golden Paisa tablets moved under ironclad protection. A caravan master who had served the court could boldly demand shelter and oats anywhere. A humble monk with a governor's letter could cross 3 languages in a single week without once being robbed. Those roads, those incredible roads, became the empire's most enduring, most brilliant invention. Can you even fathom the freedom and connection they brought? But the army never stood idle while clerks sharpened their brushes. No chance. Mukali, that steadfast old pillar of the north, had finally died with full honours after holding the northern plain like a rock. New pillars rose to take his place, strong and ready. The long campaign against the Jin resumed with crystal clear objectives. The Jin court had fled south to Kaifeng, and then even farther, desperately hoping distance and new allies would stall the unstoppable northern riders. Ögedei and Tolui planned a series of brilliant advances designed to shatter the last resistance and send a thunderous message to the southern Song. The North would never, ever be just a buffer. The Mongol armies crossed the frozen Yellow River in the dead of winter, their tough little ponies sure-footed on ice that cracked and groaned under heavier beasts. They brought siege engines now built by Chinese and Khitan crews who worked as a regular, feared part of the train. At Kaifeng, the Jin faced a storm they simply could not turn. Naphtha bombs exploded with terrifying roars that startled even hardened steppe veterans. Fire lances spat deadly flame from the walls in one final frantic effort to hold the besiegers back. But famine followed fire as stocks ran desperately short. The Jin emperor fled yet again, and in the year Chinese annals record as 1234, Jin rule finally ended forever when Mongols and Song together crushed the last stubborn remnant. Victory at last. Yet alliances rarely survive once the shared enemy is gone. Oh, how true that is. The Song soon learned the hard way that the new rulers of the north had no intention of letting the Huai River become a permanent border. But before the southern question could be fully settled, the West called with irresistible urgency. The vast lands assigned to the sons of Yochi remained a swirling zone of opportunity and danger. Batu, son of Yochi, spoke confidently for the line that held grazing rights from the Irtysh all the way to the lower Volga. He wasn't the eldest in the family, but he possessed rare patience, a huge following, and the priceless talent of working alongside a genius like Subutai, without a trace of envy. Subutai had returned from that legendary long western ride with entire maps burned into his mind. Rivers, mountain passes, everything that led straight into the heart of Europe. Ogedei made the bold decision to strike in overwhelming force, to clear the wild Kipchak steppe once and for all, to punish the Cumans, who had dared raid subject peoples, and to test those distant cities beyond the forests that had only heard wild rumors of men who could move an entire army for months without ever running out of mounts. The muster was enormous beyond anything the steppe had ever seen. Princes of the royal house gathered proudly with their tumans. Guyuk came as son of the great Khan himself. Munka arrived as eldest son of Tolui. Kadan represented the house of Ogedai. Order stood strong for the house of Yoki. The army moved like a living storm in separate wings that could be 100 miles apart, yet still strike the exact same point on the exact same day. Subutai traced the daring line across the Ural foothills, through the Great Volga Bend, and deep into the forest belt beyond the open plain. Winter itself was chosen as ally for crossing major rivers. Ice turned treacherous water into solid road, and surprise hid quietly under blankets of snow. The first crushing blows fell on the Volga Bulgars and the cities of the lower Volga. Then the wings wheeled west with terrifying speed. Polovtsian riders scattered like leaves in a gale. The Cumans ran, rallied desperately, and ran again. The princes of the Rus gathered in uneasy, suspicious councils, proud, stubborn men who struggled to agree on anything except how much they disliked one another's claims. The Mongols didn't wait for unity. They took town after town along the upper Volga and the Oka, tested walls with engines hauled on sledges, and moved on the moment a place yielded to the first thunderous demand. By the spring of 1241, one wing thundered into Poland, while another poured into Hungary. Can you imagine the panic spreading across Europe? Subutai sent a lightning-fast diversion under Baidar and Kadan through Lesser Poland to pull Western princes away from the main strike. Krakow burned fiercely when it dared resist. At Legnica, the Duke of Silesia drew up his knights, burghers, and a proud contingent of Teutonic brothers for a stand. The Mongols used smoke and masterful feigned flight to tear the line apart, then struck the broken pieces with blinding speed. The Duke fell. European chroniclers wrote in horror of heads impaled on lances and captured banners carried in dark triumph. That diversion worked perfectly. It kept Western armies from ever joining the King of Hungary on the Danube plain. Batu and Subutai forced the towering Carpathians by multiple roads and poured like an avalanche into the Hungarian heartland. King Bela had tried to secure his host on a marshy island near the Sajo River, trusting that one narrow bridge could be held forever. The Mongols simply built two more undercover of night. They carried timbers and rope in silence, drove piles deep into the mud, and created a hidden crossing exactly where scouts had found the river shallow. At dawn, they attacked the known bridge with terrifying noise and fury, while Subutai sent a massive weight of horse thundering across the secret structures to smash into the Hungarian flank and rear. Arrows did their deadly work. Panic did the rest. The camp shattered completely. The plain near a village later remembered as Mohi was thick with the dead and glittering with abandoned loot. The army didn't even pause. It hunted fleeing remnants across the countryside and then turned south to strike hard at Croatia and Dalmatia. European statesmen stared at their maps in stunned silence, unable to comprehend an invader who used winter itself as a friend and who could build bridges in a single night where locals needed an entire season. And while all Europe reeled in shock and fear, back in far-off Karakorum, Ogedei, after a winter of heavy drinking and a sudden merciless fever, died. A great empire that had learned to move with the speed of a courier now learned the heavy price of ancient custom. The princes far in the west were bound by sacred rule. A new great Khan must be chosen in full assembly, and nothing less would do. Oh, the tension was thick enough to cut with a dagger. Batu had no love at all for Gug, harbouring deep resentment from old wounds, and he flatly refused to submit to him outside a proper, sacred Kuriltai. Guyuk, for his part, would never accept that Batu had acted merely as a dutiful son of Yochi, seeing only ambition and defiance. How heartbreaking to watch family ties strain to the breaking point. The legendary Subutai, ever the visionary general, passionately argued for pushing a daring winter campaign straight into the heart of Austria and far beyond imagine the glory. But the sudden order came to withdraw. The vast army turned east, leaving Europe trembling in disbelief. Chroniclers in distant Germany and Italy breathed huge sighs of relief, whispering tales of divine angels who had miraculously saved Christendom from utter destruction. But the truth was far more human, far more Mongol. An ancient law that bound princes together demanded the entire house return home to choose a new head. Custom over conquest. What a profound pull. Before the next leader could even be chosen, the sprawling empire continued to shift and change shape in surprising ways. Tolui had died earlier, heroically offering his own life in a sacred ritual to save Ogedei from a grave, life-threatening illness. Such selfless devotion. His remarkable widow, Sorkhokhtani Beki, took guardianship of her 4 sons with a skill and wisdom that impressed even hardened men who stubbornly did not wish to praise a woman. She secured the finest tutors for them in multiple languages and complex law, patiently showed them how to deeply respect clerics of many diverse faiths, and taught them the vital lesson of letting talented servants do their essential work without constant fear or interference. She never attended grand councils merely as a silent figurehead, no. She managed crucial alliances with masterful care and quiet strength. What an extraordinary woman. When Guyuk was finally raised as Great Khan after a long period of regency by his determined mother Turagena, it was Sorkhokhtani who skillfully protected the interests of her own sons without ever sparking a public quarrel. Her subtle influence was everywhere. Guyuk ruled with a rigid stiffness that deeply offended Batu and quietly alarmed some key ministers. Tragically, he died suddenly while on patrol far in the west, before he could force a harsh settlement that might have shattered the fragile unity of the house. All the while, through these turbulent times, the solid administrative habits planted by the visionary Chinggis and carefully refined by Ogedei kept the massive engine of empire humming steadily. Daragachi overseers wrote regular reports to Karakoram about tax shortfalls, devastating floods, and local needs. The indispensable yam relay system ran smoothly, despite ongoing wars and bitter quarrels among princes. Ortok merchants boldly funded vast caravans with generous advances from the court and were faithfully paid back with fair shares of tolls. Skilled craftsmen who had been gathered from conquered Zhongdu and Kaifeng now built fearsome siege engines in distant Samarkand and Bukhara. A brilliant cannon of ideas fired brightly from every direction across the empire. Paper money was carefully studied where it had already taken strong root in the south. Gunpowder recipes travelled swiftly with experienced engineers and found their way into the detailed notebooks of learned men writing in Syriac and in Arabic. A knowledgeable surgeon from Persia engaged in fascinating discussions about cautery with a Chinese physician, and both wisely observed that a simple saddle sore on a good pony could prove a far greater problem to a long campaign than any abstract theory about humours. Practical wisdom at its finest. In North China, the intense war against the resilient Song finally began in deadly earnest. The Song Navy proudly commanded the great rivers and possessed impressive shipyards that could produce powerful war junks in astonishing numbers. The Mongols adapted brilliantly, learning to fight fiercely on water by hiring expert pilots from subject peoples and by forcing surrendered shipwrights to train fresh, eager crews. At one critical moment, a skilled Song admiral named Liu Yunwen scored a striking victory on the mighty Yangtze, unleashing devastating fireships and anchoring a firm chain across the powerful current. Mongol commanders took the hard lesson to heart, swiftly rebuilt their rivercraft with improvements, and then masterfully used winter ice and low water seasons to bring heavy engines against river towns that had foolishly believed themselves forever safe. Within the royal house, the careful division of lands that had started as simple appanages took on much clearer, more defined shape. The Yoshid realm in the vast western steppe matured into a powerful khanate that Europeans would later call the Golden Horde. It transformed fur, fish, and bustling traffic along the Volga into immense wealth and directed calculated raids and clever diplomacy toward the Black Sea and the Balkans. The Chagatai realm in mysterious Transoxiana firmly held the vital trade routes between glorious Samarkand and distant Kashgar, and became a sophisticated court where rich Turkic and proud Mongol customs beautifully interwove. The Toluid branch remained firmly anchored in Mongolia and in North China, holding the central seat at Karakoram and the strongest claim to the exalted title of Great Khan. Those lines that had begun as mere family allotments gradually became permanent borders where different balances of custom and law settled comfortably over time. The centre still commanded overall, but it commanded through men who harboured their own private interests and who learned to cleverly mask those interests in eloquent speeches about loyal service to the house. Ögedei's transformative reign thus drew two massive, fateful lines on the map of the world. One ran boldly south through former Jin territory, deep into Songlands. The other stretched relentlessly west with Batu and Subutai across endless rivers and dense forests. The southern line demanded masterful siegecraft and extraordinary long patience. The western line required grueling winter marches, ingenious bridges built on sturdy piles, and a visionary mind that could imagine striking 3 heavily fortified towns in a single day by using separate wings that had not seen one another for a full week. The efficient postal system and strong merchant partnerships bound both ambitious lines securely to the center. The sacred legal rules about envoys made it possible for these far-flung lines to communicate and coordinate. The wise habit of raising truly able men, whether they were born under simple felt tents or inside towering walled towns, kept the lines from dangerously fraying when one vital pillar suddenly died. When men reflect on the legendary age of Chinggis, they often picture only thundering gallop and roaring fire. But the age of Ögedei added something far less visible, yet just as potent and enduring. It added rhythm, a steady, reliable pulse to the empire. Orders flew out from bustling Karakoram at crisp dawn. Detailed reports returned faithfully at dusk. Savvy merchants planned their long caravans for the lush seasons when grass would be richest and greenest near key relay posts. Fair judges set aside specific days for hearing disputes and for carefully recording just settlements. Captains diligently trained fresh new units throughout the harsh winter so that vibrant spring did not demand teaching both horses and men at the same frantic time. A promising boy in the elite Keshig learned precisely where to stand in a grand council and when to speak boldly and when to wisely hold his tongue. A bright girl married into the influential Ongud discovered she could send an important message to the distant center with a trusted clerk and confidently expect a thoughtful answer before the season fully turned. The tough men who gathered by the warm fire at night, meticulously polishing their arrowheads, spoke more often now of safe, reliable roads than of shifting borders. They could ride freely from the majestic Altai to the distant Caspian without constant fear of being robbed by ruthless highwaymen. They could deliver a crucial letter from Karakoram to far-off Bukhara and expect a timely reply within a span that actually made careful planning possible. They could approach a knowledgeable Persian merchant for fine lamps and watch them arrive safely in a month or two under strong armed guard. That sense of connection and security is exactly what empire feels like to those fortunate enough to live within it. It feels like a road that does not break, no matter how far you travel. The powerful voice that had once named Urgadai as heir still echoed strongly in the councils of his sons and nephews. Yet empire is not a simple garment that passes smoothly with a single gesture. No, it lives and breathes only through constant, thoughtful decisions. After the sudden death of Urgadai, a remarkable woman stepped forward to keep the center from tearing apart in chaos. Turrigan, his principal wife and a force in her own right, firmly held the imperial seals as regent, while a new Kuriltai could be carefully called. She used generous gifts and stern threats to gather crucial support for her son. Guyuk was triumphantly lifted as Great Khan and took his honored place in the grand felt court at Karakoram. His reign proved brief and intensely taut. He pushed administrators and princes hard, demanding excellence, and drank deeply, as if trying to race his own restless heart. Tragically, he died while on the road far toward the west, where he had intended to sharply chastise Batu of the House of Yochi. The center trembled once more with uncertainty, and then steadied remarkably under yet another strong woman. Ogul-Kaimish kept the formal title of regent, but struggled to hold the vital loyalties that truly mattered. Facing her quietly, yet gathering immense strength without flashy parade, stood a queen whose extraordinary tact and profound learning impressed both loyal allies and wary rivals. Sorkoktani, devoted widow of Tolui and proud mother of Munka, Kublai, Hulagu, and Arik Burka, she had educated her sons thoroughly in multiple languages and intricate lore, maintained steadfast faith with clerics of many religions, and placed the most able tutors near each promising boy. When the long-awaited Kuriltai finally met in the year that both Persian and Chinese chronicles marked with great care, Munka was raised as Great Khan amid thunderous approval. He began boldly with a thorough purge of those who had shamelessly abused the sacred trust of the house. Men who had corruptly sold offices or harshly shaken peasants with illegal levies were removed swiftly and without ceremony. The powerful line of Tolui had finally grasped the reins of destiny. Munka ruled with a steady, reassuring gravity. He did not love wine as his uncle had. He loved precise lists, accurate reports, and dependable commanders who could thoughtfully plan an entire season at a time. He faithfully kept Yelu Chukai's wise emphasis on proper registration and measured fair taxation. He promoted only men who took bribes from absolutely no one. Then, with visionary boldness, he opened two massive doors at once. One door faced resolutely south toward the stubborn Song, who still held the richest, most fertile basins of China. The other swung open to the mysterious west, toward the lingering remains of the Khwarazm world, toward the formidable castles of the Nizari, who had once boldly cut down viziers in crowded bazaars, and toward the ancient, glittering cities of the Caliph on a mighty Tigris. Oh, picture the thunderous moment. Hulegu, the fierce third son of Tolui, received urgent orders to march west with a truly great host that shook the earth. Engineers and tireless sappers, masterful siege experts and sharp Persian accountants, hardy Armenian laborers and skilled Georgian carpenters. All these diverse talents marched proudly under the flowing horsehair standards. What an awe-inspiring sight, this unstoppable force gathering. One by one, the impregnable castles of the mysterious Nizari fell in dramatic fashion as relentless stone throwers gnawed hungrily at their ancient foundations. Can you hear the thunderous crashes? At the legendary stronghold of Alamut, their priceless libraries were meticulously catalogued, and some precious books carefully preserved by wise secretaries who deeply valued learning, even in the chaos of war. How remarkable that knowledge found protection amid destruction. From there, the mighty army surged onward to the life-giving Tigris River. Baghdad, that glorious lighthouse for scholars and poets across centuries, stood proudly at a sweeping bend in the river, protected by sturdy dikes and home to a vast population large enough to fill endless fields with golden grain and bustling markets with exquisite cloth from countless distant lands. Hulagu sent dignified envoys demanding submission, but the caliph answered with overconfident words rooted in faded old prestige, not in the hard reality of armoured men he could actually place on his walls. The Mongol lines tightened like a noose. Stone throwers boomed relentlessly day and night. Then, on a cold winter day, the defences finally cracked with a deafening roar. The city was taken. The sack that followed was devastatingly heavy, even by the cruel standards of that unforgiving age. Historians who later walked solemnly among the haunting ruins tried desperately to count the dead, and could only whisper in horror that the mighty Tigris ran black with ink from shattered libraries and deep red from the blood of the fallen. What unimaginable tragedy! Yet from those ashes, a vibrant new court rose in the west, first at Maraga and then at Grand Tabriz. There, Hulagu generously placed brilliant scholars under one protective roof with gleaming brass instruments. The renowned astronomer Nasir al-Din al-Tusi built a magnificent observatory that boldly brought ancient Chinese star tables into deep conversation with timeless Greek and Persian theories. Imagine it. A Mongol court had created a shining house where bold new knowledge could flourish and be born. How inspiring amid the conquest. But power always answers power, doesn't it? In the vast north, the ruler of the Western Steppe had embraced Islam. Berka of the House of Yochi felt the shocking fall of Baghdad as a personal affront and watched Hulagu with icy, unforgiving eyes. The once strong friendship that had bound branches of the family painfully bent and cracked. Berka swiftly found common cause with the fierce Mamluks of Egypt, who had forged an army from freed slaves and transformed them into undisputed masters of Cairo and all Syria. Just a year after Hulagu had ruthlessly ended the caliphate, a determined Mongol detachment lingered in Syria to hold hard-won ground while the main army rebuilt strength in the east. The Mamluks marched boldly under Qutuz and the cunning Baybars and met them at a historic spring called Ain Jalut. There, on a scorching hot September day, the Mamluks brilliantly used classic steppe tricks against seasoned steppe veterans. They feigned a panicked retreat, drawing the overconfident enemy into perfect open ground, then struck suddenly from cover with fresh cavalry and a blinding dust storm of deadly arrows. The brave Mongol commander Kitbuka fell in the chaos. The long-held spell of Mongol invincibility shattered dramatically in the Levant, while Hulagu grappled with sudden revolt and crippling famine back in Iran. Berka's fierce riders boldly crossed the towering Caucasus and clashed with Ilkhanid detachments along the wild Terek. For the first time on a large, heartbreaking scale, nephews and cousins killed one another in open war. The once united house of Genghis had tragically become more than just a family. It had splintered into rival states with interests that no longer aligned. Oh, the sorrow of division. In the vast east, Munka pressed relentlessly hard on the stubborn Song. He demanded endless grain, vital shipyards, and a sustained, crushing push along treacherous river lines. He assigned Kublai the challenging northern theatre and instructed Arik Boka to steadfastly keep the precious heartland secure. The disciplined armies captured city after magnificent city along the great winding river. Talented Chinese engineers constructed ingenious floating bridges and towering mobile siege platforms. When a desperate defender unleashed terrifying fireships down the rushing current, sturdy stockades and protective barges bravely broke the flaming attack. Munka himself took the field against defiant Sichuan and died tragically during the campaign, perhaps from sudden disease, perhaps from sheer exhaustion. His shocking death released the pent-up tension that had barely held the house together. What a turning point. Kublai was swiftly proclaimed Great Khan in the north at majestic Shangdu. Arik Boka was proclaimed in traditional Karakoram with strong support from many proud princes of the homeland. A bitter civil war erupted that carried urgent messengers and sharp lances across the very spine of Asia. Kublai ultimately won by patiently wearing his brother down through superior distance control, unbreakable supply lines, and the slow, masterful squeeze of politics. Arik Boka yielded in defeat and died a prisoner such heartbreaking family strife. Kublai wisely set his grand capital at Kambalik, the glorious city of the Khan, present-day Beijing, and boldly declared a new dynasty with a proud Chinese name. Yuan was inscribed on imperial seals and fluttering banners, and the court gracefully took on the heavy burdens and rich privileges of true Chinese emperors. Kublai proved a strikingly different kind of ruler from his legendary grandfather. He faithfully kept the efficient decimal organization of the army and deeply honored the flowing tassels of horsehair that had marked his noble house since its earliest days. Yet he transformed into a sophisticated man who carefully read memorials from learned Chinese scholars and replied in elegant, neat phrases. He ordered the vital Grand Canal repaired so that abundant grain could flow smoothly from the lush rice fields of the south to the overflowing warehouses of the capital. He printed paper money in massive volume and firmly insisted that markets accept it, backing it confidently with solid grain reserves and reliable tax receipts. He built vast granaries to wisely steady the price of food during lean, hungry years. He warmly hosted envoys from distant Venice and from the Pope himself, and listened attentively to a friar named William of Rubruck discuss the mysterious shape of the earth and the subtle differences between Greek and Latin rites. He graciously received a famous Venetian merchant family whose adventurous son would later write a captivating book that fed the hungry imagination of Europe for centuries. The splendid palace at Dadu boasted a remarkable mix of lords in its echoing halls that no earlier Chinese court had ever seen. Mongols, Uyghurs, Turks, Tibetans, Persians, and Chinese served side by side in harmony. They never forgot who they truly were, yet they learned step by step how to work together in one grand house. The final conquest of the resilient Southern Song tested every hard-earned lesson the empire had absorbed. The Song possessed fine ships with strong-ribbed hulls, highly drilled crews, and wise ministers who knew exactly how to supply an army by water when solid roads were scarce. Kublai boldly built a powerful navy. He captured surrendered shipwrights and ordered them to diligently, teach other peoples how to construct sturdy rivercraft that could mount heavy engines and carry skilled archers. He advanced steadily along the mighty Yangtze and then deeper into the maze of lakes and channels in the lower basin. Year by relentless year, the Mongol and allied forces patiently ate away at the long list of Song strongholds. At last, a decisive fleet battle settled the fate. Off the rugged headlands near Yaishan, the final Song forces gathered desperately with the young boy emperor and a fiercely loyal minister named Lu Xiufu. The skilled Mongol admiral Zhang Hongfang pressed the attack with unyielding force. The Song ships were chained tightly together to prevent panicked flight. Terrifying firepots leaped wildly between decks. The wind suddenly faltered and cruelly betrayed the defenders. In a moment of heartbreaking sacrifice, Lu Xiufu wrapped the child emperor protectively in his arms and stepped resolutely into the sea. With that tragic act, the last dynasty of the South ended forever, and the whole of China finally stood united under the rule of the house that had begun so humbly on the distant Onon. Kublai's restless attention soon wandered beyond familiar China to mysterious seas and dense forests that the elders of the steppe had only heard about in tales. He sent massive fleets to distant Japan with experienced Korean shipwrights and seasoned Chinese crews. The first Grand Armada reached the islands and fought bravely on the beaches, then shattered under a sudden, ferocious storm. The second, even larger than the first, arrived years later and met the exact same devastating fate. Japanese chroniclers reverently called those storms divine winds kamikaze, but the plainer truth that mattered to Kublai was harsher. Ships built in frantic haste and filled with men who did not share a common language had severe limits when a raging typhoon swept across a vulnerable bay. He dispatched powerful armies into the sweltering heat of Southeast Asia, to majestic Pagan, to resilient Champa, and to the lush rice fields of Jai Viet. In each bold campaign, he could seize a capital and dictate stern terms. Yet, in each case, the thick jungle, punishing monsoon rains, and unyielding local will transformed hard-won victories into drawn-out negotiations and then into uneasy, fragile stalemates. No swift rider can ever gallop through a tangled mangrove swamp. The vast empire painfully learned that reach is not the same as firm grasp. Oh, what a humbling lesson. While the powerful Toluid branch shaped and molded China into something new, the other branches found their own unique rhythms across the world. The golden horde of the Yochid house proudly set its capital at Grand Sarai on the lower Volga. There, the mighty Volga and Don formed a natural hinge between wide-open country and wooded river lanes. The horde skillfully managed the Russian principalities through official charters that named a Grand Prince and granted him the solemn right to collect tribute for the distant Khan. A prince journeyed to Sarai to receive the precious patent, the Yarlik, and returned home with enough prestige to overawe rivals. Some wise rulers, like the famous Alexander Nevsky of Novgorod and Vladimir, learned to navigate within this order and even use it to keep their towns safe from neighboring threats. Caravans moved steadily to and from the Black Sea with strong guard patrols. Trade in rich furs, precious wax, and golden grain flourished and grew. Over time, the horde's rulers wholeheartedly embraced Islam, and beautiful mosques rose proudly near the bustling markets where Italian merchants maintained busy warehouses. The horde became a unique state, of both the open steppe and the flowing river-blending worlds. Oh, just imagine the heavy burden of healing in Iran, the Ilkhanate had grappled desperately with the deep, lingering wounds left by the devastating fall of Baghdad, along with crippling famine and sudden revolts that tore at the land. Under the strong rule of Abakar and then the visionary Ghazan, the court made a profound shift. They wholeheartedly adopted Islam and poured tremendous effort into knitting the fractured country back together. What a remarkable transformation from conquerors to unifiers. Rising like a star in this turbulent time was Rashid al-Din, a man born Jewish who had embraced Islam and become a skilled physician. He soared to become vizier and penned a truly vast, breathtaking history that boldly sought to weave together Chinese, Indian, Islamic, and Mongol strands into one grand unified narrative. Can you picture the passion? He sent urgent requests for detailed reports from governors and far-traveling adventurers across the entire empire just to complete this monumental universal history. How inspiring his dedication to knowledge and unity. The Ilkhanate Mint worked tirelessly, striking fresh coins with new weights and intricate designs. And they even tried, with high hopes, to introduce paper currency, though it ultimately failed without the strong administration needed to support it. Meanwhile, the magnificent Moraga Observatory produced stunning star tables that profoundly influenced astronomical work from distant Damascus all the way to glorious Samarkand. What a golden age of discovery under Mongol patronage. Nestled between these powerful western states and Kublai's mighty Yuan lay the proud realm of the Chagatai. There, ambitious princes skillfully balanced rich Turkic customs with the enduring legal habits of the original Mongol center. Harmony amid diversity. But not all was peaceful, right? Kaidu, a determined grandson of Ogedei, flatly refused to accept Kublai's supremacy and waged a long, grueling war across vast Central Asia that kept vital roads in constant peril and severely taxed the strength of both rival courts. The bitter conflict taught yet another hard lesson in the unforgiving politics of distance. No single man could now command effortless, instant obedience across the whole sweeping expanse of lands that Genghis had so brilliantly conquered. How sobering to see the empire's vastness become its own challenge. Each proud branch guarded its own cherished capital and spoke loftily of unity, while quietly measuring the private interests of its own lush pastures and bustling markets. Ambition and independence pulling at the seams. Yet through all this swirling change and tension, the brilliant instruments built in the very first generation never fell idle. Oh no! The reliable Yam continued to speak crucial orders and vital reports between far-flung capitals. Envoys still carried gleaming Pisa tablets and confidently expected that every door would swing open to them. Merchants faithfully maintained strong partnerships with powerful governors and princes, supplying hungry armies with flour, sturdy rope, and vital iron, just as they had in the bold days of the founder himself. The efficient decimal organization of troops remained the unbreakable skeleton on which every new campaign was built. Law still fiercely protected the sacred messenger and swiftly punished any man who dared steal a horse from a relay post. Clerics of many diverse faiths continued to travel freely without fear of petty, harassing officials. On the incredible roads of this vast empire, a humble Franciscan friar could one week drink tangy fermented mare's milk in a cozy steppe tent. The next savor fragrant pilaf in a luxurious Persian caravanserai, and then respectfully bow before a dignified Chinese magistrate clad in flowing silk robes. What astonishing freedom and connection! The empire never forced all these places to become the same no. It simply made it possible to move between them with far greater safety than any wide-eyed traveller in earlier centuries could ever have dreamed or expected. How revolutionary! And exchange always runs both ways, doesn't it? Paper-making secrets learned in China travelled steadily west. Deadly gunpowder formulas moved along those same bustling routes and forever changed how sieges were grimly fought in the Levant and across Europe. Beautiful artistic motifs from Iran and from China met and mingled in exquisite glazed tiles that decorated grand palaces, from majestic Tabriz to bustling Dadu. Medical knowledge crossed stubborn lines of language with ease. A learned doctor who studied Avicenna began to deeply value pulse diagnosis and urine examination from ancient Chinese practice, and thoughtfully added those insights to his own growing lists. Officials in the prosperous Yuan learned from clever Persian accountants how to construct sophisticated centralized ledgers that spanned more than one province. Brilliant Muslim astronomers patiently taught Chinese scholars the disciplined habits of keeping meticulous, systematic observations night after night with precisely aligned instruments. The same vibrant pathways that carried precious goods now carried innovative methods and ideas, spreading enlightenment far and wide. But movement also carried heartbreaking misfortunes. In the middle of the 14th century, a terrifying sickness rose silently from the remote valleys of the Great Plateau and crept along busy caravan tracks. At the strategic port of Kaffa on the Black Sea, a vital town watched closely by the Golden Horde, and a bustling node where Italians eagerly traded for rich steppe goods. The deadly disease climbed aboard ships and rode unseen with sailors straight to Mediterranean harbours. What the horrified world would later call the Black Death burned mercilessly through crowded port cities and then swept inland to devastate towns. The very roads that had made the world feel so wonderfully connected now carried a merciless plague that emptied once thriving streets in waves of grief. No ruler had ever planned or wanted this horror. It was the unintended, tragic payment for a full century of bold, open travel. How devastating the price of connection. For the enduring memory of Genghis himself, there remained a deeper, quieter current flowing through time. The law's men reverently called the Chai. Were never neatly written out in a single codex where a reader could simply turn pages to find a tidy list of clauses. They lived vibrantly in spoken proclamations, in wise judgments, and in the ingrained habit of obedience to a ruler who promised genuine fairness. Later courts argued passionately about the exact letter of the Yasa and built elaborate commentaries around what they believed the great founder had truly willed. The Mongols themselves kept his powerful words alive in their hearts and in their cherished stories, passed down by firelight, the priceless. Secret history. Carefully written down in Chinese transcription of Mongol words just a generation after his death, preserved the heartfelt songs and fierce quarrels of his youth, and gave an intimate inner voice to men who had otherwise appeared only as distant subjects in foreign chronicles. Persian historians like Juvaini and Rashid al-Din placed Mongol deeds within sweeping long arcs that began with Adam himself and with the ancient rulers of Iran. Chinese memorials thoughtfully traced how a raw steppe court could evolve into a sophisticated dynasty, yet still remain strikingly unlike any that had ruled before it. To read across these diverse witnesses is to hear passionate argument echoing through the ages. Yet, it is also to hear profound agreement about certain timeless traits. The founder richly rewarded unwavering loyalty, swiftly punished betrayal, warmly welcomed useful skill from any source, and fiercely insisted that envoys always be safe. The beating center of the empire drifted gradually as generations passed. Karakoram's sturdy timbers weathered under wind and time. Kambalik drew ever more power to itself as capable Yuan officials managed vital river transport and overflowing granaries with a precise ritual rhythm perfectly suited to the fertile south. Sarai prospered along the mighty Volga with its lively market quarter and graceful mosques. Tabriz sent precious goods to the distant Mediterranean, with taxes collected by practical men who wore warm fur in harsh winter and light linen in blazing summer. Each proud branch wore the classic Mongol coat in its own distinctive style, yet a weary traveller moving between them always knew that certain familiar sights would greet him wherever he went. He would spot the striking black tuff banner of horsetails proudly flying at a commander's tent. He would find a reliable relay post stocked with fresh horses and an attentive clerk. He would watch a man wearing a gleaming paisa pass smoothly through a toll gate without paying a coin. He would hear the stern words that strictly forbade any harm to a messenger and promised swift, severe punishment if harm was ever done. That enduring spirit is exactly what remained of the pure first intention of the humble boy beside the distant honor. He had built not only a fearsome army, but a revolutionary way to move power across vast space. In the ancient steppe homeland centuries later, wise elders still rode out reverently to sacred Burkan Khaldun to offer heartfelt thanks for extraordinary life that had begun there. They never built a grand stone over the hidden grave that the clan had guarded with solemn silence. They carried his immortal memory in cherished rituals and in proud names passed down through generations. In towns far from that misty mountain, rulers of later dynasties pointed eagerly to claimed lines of descent from the legendary House of the Blue Wolf and the graceful fallow doe to justify their own ambitious claims. Some spoke his name with burning hate, some with deep admiration, and many with a complicated mix of both at once. His descendants ruled vast China, mysterious Iran, and the endless steppes in different centuries and under profoundly different creeds. Yet wherever a brave courier rode under a recognized safe conduct, wherever a determined merchant demanded fair measure under a charter bearing a proud Mongol seal, and wherever a wise judge allowed a Brahmin, a monk, and a mullah to argue passionately in the same open court without fear, a living strand of his very first ideas still showed beautifully true. What an eternal legacy.